Hi, I'm Krutika, and today's conversation is with James. When we talk about the parent-child dynamic, we usually imagine the parent as the primary caregiver. That wasn't the case for James. From the age of 4, he found himself taking on caring responsibilities after his mum was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, an autoimmune disease that eventually left her in a coma state when James was still a teenager. James's journey is truly remarkable, not just because of what he's been through, but because of how he reflects on it. He shares his experiences with a quiet stoicism and without complaint, showing a level of resilience that's genuinely admirable. In this conversation, we explore what being a carer meant for him, how a breakthrough led to James unpacking those experiences, and how life came full circle when he later found himself caring for his dad after a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. Experiences like these could understandably leave someone feeling bitter, but that's not James. He speaks with a deep sense of gratitude and a perspective on life that I found truly enlightening. Hey James, it's so good to have you on my podcast. How are you doing?
Great. I'm great on this. This is still January, isn't it? I'm still not out of the twilight zone yet of Christmas.
Apparently, was last week Blue Monday, or I don't know if tomorrow is Blue Monday, but how are you feeling about that? Are you someone that embraces the new year as like, oh yeah, new year, new me? Or are you someone that just finds January the hardest month of the year?
It really depends, believe it or not. Professionally, in terms of my work, it's all good because the university role that I'm in is so flexible. That's great. So things kick off generally later on in the month. But personally, get me to the spring as soon as possible. I have no doubt I've got this seasonal affective disorder, and the good old dark nights and the dark mornings, they're not my thing. Generally, whenever we get to St. Patrick's Day in the middle of March, the 17th of March, is always a sort of watershed moment for things to I love it whenever the flowers are starting to come up out of the ground, the trees are starting to bud and come into leaf. Get to that stage up.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think the dark mornings and the dark evenings can be a little bit depressive for us. I totally hear you. James, are you the sort of person that also sets New Year's resolutions or targets?
No,
Are you one of those? No.
not at all.
Okay.
Not at all, because I know if I do that, I'll break them.
I think majority of the people do, and there's a stat that within the second week of January, 80% of people have not really stuck to whatever resolution they've said. So no, fair enough. I do actually have a quote behind me, which you probably can't see because the screen's blurred, but it says success is the product of daily habits. So
Yes.
what I try and do is just think about like habits, and especially habit stacking. So if I know I've got a good habit, already, what can I add to that to just think about a goal that I might want to achieve, for example? So yeah, different ways to approach
When you
it.
look with goals and things like that, it's the end game, not necessarily the timing of anything. So, for example, I think I wrote a post about this on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. A friend asked me the question about what are you going to do differently, or what are the goals for 2026? And there was about five or six of us sitting in a room at my home here, and they all talked about business. And I bucked the trend, and I went, I want to be as healthy as I was in my 20s. The other thing is, I'm now in my mid 40s, and that's I can't out-train a bad diet anymore, which I always used to do. And so therefore the goal of losing weight is now it's about health now, rather than looking great on the beach or anything like that. So my goal is now reflecting on the circumstances rather than any particular timing or anything like that.
Yeah, oh, I hear you. And I'm so glad you mentioned that point about health, because much like what you've just said in terms of what you want to achieve this year around your health, for me, this year, one of my priorities is also thinking about upping my strength. And I'm trying to habit stack by just adding to that a little bit more each
Yeah,
year. And
absolutely.
that feels a little bit more realistic. Now, I feel we could probably just spend this entire conversation talking about goal setting and what we want to achieve in 2026. But I know one of the things that I certainly reached out to you about was a very interesting LinkedIn post that you'd shared last year. And that was around you being a carer for your mum who had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Now, before we come on to just explore that, to begin with, could you just tell us a little bit about your early childhood and what was life like for you and your family before your mum got diagnosed with MS?
I'll give you a quick run through here. So I'm from a beautiful part of the world. I come from a village called Loughin Island in County Down in the north of Ireland. And as I look out the window here, I'm looking on rolling fields, I'm looking on sheep, things like we're surrounded with ancient Irish history in this part of the world, and St. Patrick is buried 7 miles away. So this is the part of the world that I come from. I am actually in, how would you put it? This is where my people reside. So I am sitting in the house here. Thankfully, it's my house. It was my great-grandfather's, it was my grandparents', it was my mum's house, and it's been passed on to me. So I'm very, very lucky. So that's my background. Believe it or not, to touch upon mum was born in this house in 1946.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's now, believe it or not, a small library, which I have. And that was the room my mum was born in. So in terms of my upbringing, born in 1979, born in the middle on the height of the Troubles here, and born into a family of mum and dad and just me. So I was born as an only child. I was 10 weeks premature. I was 2.5 pounds in weight. And that was
Wow.
a pretty big deal in 1979. The story comes even before I was born. So whenever I do some public speaking, I talk about the watershed moments. And the first watershed moment for me is intergenerational things that have happened. So poor mum and dad lost 3 babies before I was born. So 9 days, 5 days, and 2 hours old. So that
Wow.
sense of trauma was always with mum. So me being born then, I was the miracle child. They were 12 years married before they had me. They were told they could never have a living child. My village, the island, the place is called Loughin Island. It comes from the Irish Loughin Island, which means the island in the lake. And our old graveyard is an island in a lake. So there's now a modern causeway. But the story is that my dad carried the third child in a white coffin down that causeway to the old cemetery in a lake. And the priest said, Jim, I've buried your third child, but I'll baptize your fourth. And my dad said, Father, we've been told medically we can't have a living child. And lo and behold, the same priest baptized me and he died 6 months later. Now, that's crazy. So my story begins way before I was born. I was born 10th of July 1979, and to be honest, in terms of mum's illness and diagnosis and all that type of thing, mum probably had MS. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but having conversations with people, mum probably had MS whenever she was a teenager. But medical profession wasn't obviously up to speed with that. And she was diagnosed whenever I was born. So she had MS for definitely 20 years. And the hindsight of that is old relatives saying that my mum was in bed in the afternoons whenever she was a teenager. Or my dad saying, son, me and your mum used to go for a walk, and halfway through, I used to have to give her a piggyback. And I would have said, Mary, you're a big lazy lump. So mum was always ill. That's the sort of starting point for my birth.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And, just you speaking about your mum having lost 3 children. It will be remiss of me not to acknowledge at this point that I am childless, not by choice. I have shared that, not details of my journey, but I can understand the trauma and the grief that brings, and the joy that your mother must have felt knowing that you were that miracle. So thank you so much for opening up about that. You mentioned your mum, probably would have had MS as a teenager. She might not have been aware of it. I guess before we dive a little bit deeper into that, for our listeners that might not know what MS is, how would you describe it and how did it manifest for your mum and what you remember of it?
So the technical thing is that MS is affecting the brain, so the cognitive functions and also your spine essentially. So the easy way to describe MS is that it affects the signaling between the brain and the spinal column and the rest of your body. So the easy way that I think is multiple does mean everything, means many, so I always looked at it as many illnesses. So it affects people with their speech, it affects people with their sight. The most common form is obviously their mobility. Every single part of mum was affected by MS. It's a ravenous illness. It just doesn't stop. Now, there's different forms of it. There's different forms of MS. And there is the MS that can unfortunately take you within 4 to 5 years. We're probably talking mummy having MS for 50 something years, different stages. And she had a remission, obviously. That's how she was able to have the children. The signs that I can remember the most prominent was obviously her mobility and how she could walk or not walk properly. That was all the first sort of signs for me.
Yeah. Ahead of this podcast, actually, because I must admit that MS, I'd heard of it as it being a sort of autoimmune disease. I wasn't too familiar with the detail. And just to kind of educate myself, I watched the TED Talk with Robin Brockles-Lisby. I hope I'm pronouncing her surname right. I'm probably not. But she, much like what you've said, she sort of referenced how MS kind of manifests in different ways for different people. And like you've just said, for some people, within 5 to 6 years, it could really take a terrible turn. But for others, they live with it and they learn how to manage it. And so, your mum sort of living with this for 40, 50 plus years, I can only imagine over the years you might have seen, I don't know what the right word is. Was there a deterioration in her health? Did it get progressively worse? Were there techniques that she used to manage it?
So I was born in 1979. So basically all we had for treatment was cod liver oil tablets and a cortisone injection. Thank God there is so many more effective treatments for MS today. Many, many more. Back then, it was they knew nothing about it. And it's a very strange disease in that it pops up in pockets of locations. So down the east coast of Ireland, there's a lot of MS, a lot. And they don't know how it comes about. So I had a couple of scares myself, which I thought was MS, but it wasn't. But I had football injuries whenever I was 17, 18. I was heavily into playing Gaelic football, which is very popular here. And I had to quit at the age of 17, 18 because I had problems with my calf muscles. But automatically, what do you think of first? Oh, I have MS. And then I had another scare about 3 years ago because I had non-stop tingling in my legs, and again had MRI scans to check that out, and I don't have MS.
Because that was going to be my question, just as a follow-up, because you mentioned there's pockets of the East Coast where there's a lot of people that have MS. So I guess my question being, and I think you've just answered it, you're not genetically predisposed to getting the condition simply because your mother had it. No, so it's not hereditary.
No, there's no hereditary factors in it.
Right.
No hereditary factors.
And so as her condition sort of progress, can you recall the moments where you found yourself taking on those caring responsibilities, as it were?
I didn't know anything different. So my first memories of mum is I thought every mum had a walking stick. I thought every mother had a walking stick. So whenever I was born, now whatever happened to mummy physically, it was a bit like the catalyst for the MS to really start to rage, for the remission to go, and then the MS started to really ramp up. And I have a couple of memories. There's actually a video of a family wedding, and mummy was going up some steps. Now, she had one of my aunts on one arm, and she had little James's left-hand shoulder on the other hand, and I can still physically feel that. So I was second walking stick, and I think I was 4 or 5 in that video. So I never knew my mum ever to be, I'm going to say normal, I'm saying that in quotation marks, ever to be normal. But I'm going to caveat that. That was my normal with her. So I didn't think there was anything wrong. So I thought it was usual. I thought it was normal. It was only until I got older that I realized there was something not quite right. My first ever memory, and I've thought about this very, very often, was that the village primary school of about 100 pupils is less than a mile down the road. So I started school very early. I started school aged 4. Because again, way back then, there was no real play group or play school or anything like that. So you started school early, or I did anyway. And mum walked me down the road, and I can remember very vividly actually, she left me at the school gate. I turned round about a minute later, and about 100 yards down the road, she'd fallen and broke her teeth. She hit her head off the road. That was common. That was common enough. And a cousin, funny enough, she actually fell at a cousin's house. And that's what I can remember. I can turn around. I don't know why I say this, but I think she wore a pink dress. I don't know why I say that. But so that sort of stuff was normal for me. Very normal. And then the progression did happen. It happened then quite rapidly. I can remember another memory at the age of 6, and my dad wasn't at home, and mum could still walk a bit. And she could still try and wash whatever washing in the sink or whatever she was trying to do. And she fell in the bathroom. But she fell, I think she was washing something in the sink. And she fell in the bathroom and, of course, jammed herself against the door. I can remember I had to walk around as a 6-year-old boy, climb in through the window and try and get mummy out of the door. Now, I'm going to quote my dad here, right? Mary Perry, my mum, was a big, strong country girl. She was a big girl, like, now not fat, but she's a big girl, big, strong country girl, as my dad would have said. And so that was tough going. I can remember that. And then I had to get the armchair in the living room and some way take it to the bathroom and sit her in the wheelchair until my dad got home, or sit her in the armchair in the hallway until my dad got home. So these wee things, which I thought was incredibly normal, looking back, it was a whole struggle.
Mm-hmm.
That was me aged 6. Whenever I was 7, she went permanently into the wheelchair.
Okay.
Right, so she went permanently into the wheelchair, and then, let me get this right, about the early 90s, my dad retired from work. So he left work at the age of 41 or 42 to look after her permanently, and that had to happen. That had to happen. Otherwise, mum would have ended up in some sort of care, and that's fine for people, but for my dad, that wasn't going to happen. There was no way that was going to happen. So, so this was great. I had mum and dad at home permanently, really. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so, by the age of 8, 9, and 10, by the age of 14, then mummy went into a coma, right? But before that, from the age of 7, 8, 9, 10 to me being 14, it was actually very, very difficult to look after mummy. Very, very difficult. Again, we didn't know. We didn't see it as difficult. The reason why I'm saying that is because everything was manual. So I had to manually take her to the toilet, which was lifting her out of the chair onto the wheelchair, wheeling her into the bathroom, up off the chair, onto the toilet, and then the reverse. So that was a operation 4 and 5 and 6 times a day.
Wow.
Tough going, and washing mummy was tough, and feeding her. But there was one saving grace with looking after mummy, and I'm going to get emotional saying this. My mum was an absolute and utter angel, and she was a pleasure to look after, and I'm getting emotional now. MS also heightened her laughing. She developed this hysterical laugh. And she didn't have that much medication because there wasn't that much there, but whatever there was, it made her hysterical laughing. So you just would have said, Mary, boo, and off she went laughing, right? And the other one, which she done was, she used to laugh whenever you were feeding her. So you would have been putting the spoon of ambrosia cream rice, that's constantly being fed to her. Ambrosia cream rice into her mouth, and the minute something happened, she would have laughed and booming it all over you. So I used to get covered in ambrosia cream rice all the time, and my dad used to get covered all the time. Looking back on it, it was brilliant. It was hilarious. I used to get mummy and tip her up on the wheelchair and pretend I was doing Formula 1. Like, I was the fella from the age of 7 until 14. I looked after the wheelchair. I pushed mum everywhere. My dad didn't. I did.
Mm.
Used to tip her up and run her, and again, mummy was a fairly heavy weight, but she would have been laughing and so I've got nothing with the way I describe this to people. I had an Alice in Wonderland type of upbringing. I had a fairy tale childhood. Why? Because there was nothing apart from love and devotion in this house. Mum was an institution in our village because she was born and reared here. But believe it or not, she was called the Angel of Loughlin Island. People called her that because she knew what the conditions, what people knew what was happening in this house. So up to that point, it was just incredibly good. Here's my mummy. She's like she was my child. There you go. That encapsulated. Roles reversed from the age of me being 4 and 5. But whenever I was 14, she became my child even more. And I can still remember it very vividly. It was either 95 or 96. I'll tell you this. Whenever the Spice Girls 2 became 1, whenever it became number 1, that night, my mum took a fit. She took a series of epileptic fits and left her in a coma for the next 14 years. And I can remember, I know I'm laughing about this. 2 Become 1 was on the TV, and I walked into mummy's bedroom, and she was literally bouncing off the bed. I went out to my dad, Dad, there's something wrong. So I discovered her having the fits. Again, with MS, it was never directly MS. The immune system is destroyed so much by MS, everything else comes in. So there was numerous infections, and then what happened with this was it led to a series of epileptic episodes that unfortunately knocked her into, I know I say coma, I should say comatose state. And so that's what happened then.
Wow, that is a lot for a teenager to sort of handle, and it's amazing how the brain sort of remembers certain things. You mentioned the Spice Girls song that kind of you had kind of imprinted in your mind, is almost like that was at that point. That's your mum went into that coma state. Could I just ask, obviously being a teenager and that young, were your friends aware of what was happening? You were obviously at school. Did they know what you were dealing with? Did they ask questions? And obviously you also mentioned that you didn't know any different because that was your normal. So how did you kind of even communicate that to your friends?
Never really mentioned. Never really mentioned. I'm going to contradict myself. They knew something was going on, but it was never spoken about. Like, fellas don't talk, or definitely didn't talk in the 90s. And Irishmen who play Gaelic football or in this macho sort of thing, they don't talk. And you're in the midst of the troubles, you definitely are not talking. So, no. But there was a teacher in my secondary school who was from the village here, but she worked in so the secondary school was 10 miles away, and she was always aware and would have mentioned something. So I think school was aware, but because I just kept on going on and things were normal for me, nothing was ever done or nothing had to be done because all was normal. But again, looking back on things, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, this could be 15 years ago, and he says, James, do you not think we didn't know what was going on? So things like, I don't smoke or drink. So the drinking aspect, I'm an Irish man doesn't drink. Like, that's very rare. A couple of reasons for that. So mum and dad were both part of a Catholic organisation called the Pioneer Association, which was a teetotal organisation in Ireland here. So they were both part of that. That's one small part of it. But the other part of it was whenever my mates were going out to learn to drink or going out clubbing or doing whatever, I was looking after mum or helping my dad to look after mum. So, and again, I never knew anything different. But I was at a funeral or a wake or something like that. And if people know an Irish funeral or an Irish wake, it's a massive party and a massive celebration. And I was in the middle of this talking to a friend of mine, and he went, did you not know, or did you never realise we knew what was going on with you? So there was no peer pressure or anything. My mates never pushed me to do anything that way. So they knew there was something not right. So there was always an awareness there. But there was always the impact regarding, my mates going out and, you're 16 and 17 and you're going to nightclubs and all that. I didn't really get that opportunity as such. But there was other reasons. I played football for years. I had lots of friends coming here,
Yeah.
in other different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the period from 14 until 28, whenever mummy was in the comatose state, and to just let the listeners aware of how bad she was. All my mother could do for that 10-year-old period or 14-year-old period was move her eyeballs. That's it.
Wow.
She couldn't talk. She was blind. She was fed through a nasal tube by a machine, and she had locked-in syndrome, which meant she could move no part of her body apart from her eyeballs. She had that existence for 14 years.
Wow.
Now, if you're in a coma, your consciousness is probably gone and you don't know what's going on. There was definitely flickers of life there. Definitely. Especially when her eye was involved.
Did you find yourself sitting by her side and still having conversations with her during that period?
Unbelievably. That's the reason why she lasted so long. There's two reasons. Number one, we gave her a massive sense of normality. So again, the community here, I come from a small village of 500 people, and we're all bloody related because my mum's from here and it's just the way things work. And the social aspect of Ireland is that still to this day, there's 2 and 3 people come through my back door most days, and they don't knock and they just walk in.
Sounds like an Indian household, James.
And I could talk to you about the connections between India and Ireland historically. It's mad. By the way, it is mad. There's massive cultural connections between the two of us. And so that happened. So there was always a sense of normality here. And the other thing I have to mention was my dad's family, my dad's brothers and sisters. So my dad was one of 15 children, right?
Wow.
But of my dad's 8 sisters, 5 of them were nurses. And that was a massive help for us. And so things like mum would have had what I called the big wash once a week. And I absolutely loved mummy after the big wash, because what you had was she was washed, her hair was cut, and she was beautiful, right? And she smelled like a baby. So if anybody listening knows that feeling of every time you see a baby and the perfection and the smell and the smells and the how would you put it? You just want to hold that baby and cuddle them. And I had that for 14 years with my mum every single day. That affection of looking at a baby. I can't express in words how much I loved her. I can't tell you. And I'm still getting, believe it or not, today's the 18th anniversary of her death. Believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so out of all this difficult circumstance, there was one hell of a lot of good.
And it's kind of coming through in the way that you're speaking about the whole experience. Just, you've got that sort of positive look view of it, which is incredible. You don't seem, I don't want to this might be too strong a word, but when you go through something as traumatic as this, having to have been a carer for your mother, it can leave you feeling bitter, resentful, feeling like you've lost out on something, but you don't have any of that, which is so great to hear. I mean, are you unpacking some of that in your adult years now, James? And obviously you're looking back at it with that kind of positive approach, but do you
Yeah.
feel that, there are parts of you now that do things or approach life in a way because of what you grew up with in your childhood and in your teenage years?
Oh, it only hit me about 6 or 7 years after. Another thing I have to just throw into the mix in all this, which made things easier, was my dad. My dad undoubtedly was the best person I ever met. He just happened to be my dad, right? One of the kindest, happiest, jolly, knowledgeable. Like, the intelligence was unbelievable, even though he never had one qualification. So he contributed to the community massively, and the people responded. And maybe my dad's purpose for this as well, not only is his undying love for his wife, but also my dad, if he didn't meet mum, would probably have become a Catholic priest. So this was his thing to do on earth. This was his I don't know, what do you call it? His vocation, the devotion for his wife, and the love to raise his son. And my dad was completely convinced that he's going to go to heaven to meet his wife. You know what I mean? So that strength in the house was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
So essentially, me and my dad only lived to keep my mum in a okay life, even though she
Yeah.
had no life. But when you're talking about the bitterness, I'll talk about this in a bit. The outworkings of that, I've never been bitter by it, because I think I've had significant blessings because of all this. Significant. And I would like to think I've got a depth and richness to me that's quite unusual for a fella. I've always overcome my mum's death. I've never quite reconciled her suffering. I've never came to terms with I can't reconcile that.
Mm-hmm.
How, a lot of people have got lots of stuff that happens to them, but the severity of all the stuff that happened to my mum is not fair. It wasn't fair. For that to happen. Now, don't get me wrong, there's many people who's went through a hell of a lot worse. And there's stuff going on in the minute on the planet that is many times worse. But seeing your wee mummy being absolutely destroyed, sometimes I do think, what the hell was that all about?
Did that anger you? Or does that anger you?
So I was raised traditional Catholic, right? Staunch Catholic. My dad being incredibly religious. And I did have a very strong faith until about the age of 35. And then it just there's certain things happened in my life. And I went, right, big man, upstairs, whoever you are, what's going on there? So I did have a bit of a battle with whichever version of the creator or none you have in your life. I had a bit of a battle with that. Absolutely. But not bitter about it. Absolutely not. Because I realized the goodness in my life and the uniqueness of my life because of that. But I
Yeah.
just do go, that wasn't fair.
Yeah. Can I just circle back to you referring to your dad as the best person you'd sort of met?
Yeah.
Obviously, you were both, if I could say, in it together at the moment in terms of caring for your mother. Did you two ever speak about your circumstances? I know you spoke about how Irish men and you talk about your emotions, that sort of thing, but did you ever have that moment of connection with your father where you both just spoke about your emotions, the
Nope,
situation? No?
never happened. So you're
Wow.
talking to, my dad was an ultra stoic, hardcore Catholic Irishman. Emotions never come into the equation. He was brilliant at everything and the most unbelievably kind. In fact, we told each other multiple times a day that we loved each other and we hugged each other and all this sort of stuff. But with emotions up to that point, he was a bit crap at it. He was a bit crap at it. Now, equally, I'll say I was crap at it too, because you just don't tell the emotions. And I suppose the big thing was that there was more important, whenever mum was living, there was more important things in hand. So we had to change the bottle, or you had to drain the catheter, or you had to, wash her hair, or you had to administer whatever drugs. So I was like a pharmacist at the age of 14. I knew how to administer drugs. I knew how to give diazepam. That's mad.
It's almost like because of, your day-to-day situation, it's almost like your brain didn't have the capacity to process the emotions because you were just thinking about what needed to be done to keep your mum as comfortable as possible. Would you say that's fair to sort of say?
And then as a fella, so again, I didn't really have the normal teenage angst or the teenage rebelliousness or the teenage years because I couldn't rock the boat with my dad either. I couldn't have done that. Like, that wouldn't have been right. So I didn't have the teenage years probably until I was 35, but again, that's another bit. So yeah, so all I can say, all that struggle and all that tough times, I didn't see that as tough or a struggle at that time because it was all love and it was all devotion. Now, going back to my struggles with this, if mummy was fully comatose, she wouldn't have understood what was going on with her. But unfortunately, I think she had some consciousness. So maybe she did. And if you were in that prison cell for 14 years, prison cell, you have much more freedom. If you were not encapsulated in that scenario for 14 years and you were aware, again, that's the thing I struggle to reconcile.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If you consciously know I can't talk and I can't see and I have to be fed through a tube and I can hear a noise but I don't know where it's coming from and I can't move, I'm itching and I can't tell somebody, that's tough. That is tough. But yeah, so there's a whole ton of outworkings in this. So I did have normality as well. Like, I really did. It wasn't
Yeah,
I was confined all my life to this.
yeah,
There
yeah.
were some restrictions, but I had a relatively normal life, but with loads of blessings and just a slight unique twist on it.
Yeah. Have you sort of spoken to, and I don't think therapy is for everyone, but have you had a chance to kind of talk things through with, let's say, a therapist or an expert
So
or anyone for that matter?
mum passed away as an 8.
Mm-hmm.
And then life sort of continued as normal then, and especially for dad. So
Mm-hmm.
he got this freedom that he hadn't had for years upon years upon years. So dad was a very simply pleased person. All he wanted to do was travel Ireland, and him and a little cousin, my mum's cousin, who became his travel mate, toured the whole of Ireland, the free travel pass, and I didn't see him basically for 4 or 5 years because he disappeared in Ireland. Didn't want to travel further afield, he just wanted to do that. So that was great, and he had some sort of normality. But a series of things happened to me in 2015 that cracked me right open, and it was the most difficult period in my life, basically, even more than mum. And it cracked me open for 18 months. And the very, very dramatic thing of calling it is the dark night of the soul. You can talk about breakdowns, but generally it was a breakthrough. So I had this 18 months of turmoil, and then that just cracked me right open. Greatest thing ever happened because I then had to start to own up to me and my emotions and things that I had suppressed for years and opportunities I didn't have, and to actually realize, James, I know it was a fairy tale upbringing, but it wasn't. It was completely abnormal. So that then came to the fore, and things like, I never believed you could do anything by yourself. You can't go traveling by yourself. That's weird. No, it's not. James, you're never going to start a business. I did. Changed friends, changed my outlook, and I actually changed my outlook in this entire life to go, right, we're all being conditioned by this bullshit of society. Wise up. You've only got one life. So the whole crescendo happened in that 8 months, or sorry, 18 months, and it cracked me right open. And it was that stage that I did start talking to dad, and he couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle it. Not really. He was there for me and he hugged me, and I cried plenty, and I then was talking about mum's suffering, and I gave up my religion, I gave up my faith. And telling him that was tough. This guy, he was going to be a priest, that I wasn't going to go back to mass. That was tough.
Mm.
And this was all the outpouring of all that. So yes, it did then come to a head. But mummy had passed away about 7 years at this stage, and it did have to come out, and there did have to be an outpouring of all that. Did I talk to people? I went and talked to the conventional counsellor, but that never worked for me because I thought that was a tick box exercise for me. That was just the way I thought it was. And nobody could relate. Nobody could relate. But believe it or not, I was on the internet one time and this pop-up came, and this guy in Belfast, and I started to speak to him. He was a former chartered accountant. His marriage fell apart. He had a business failure, and he was brought up in the Irish Catholic lifestyle as a young fella down in Dublin. And I went, this fella can relate to some of the stuff that I've went through. And that changed everything. So if you can talk to somebody that can relate to a portion of what you've been through, and he was the one that pointed out, James, your mum's circumstances has affected you deeply. I went, no, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. That was normal for me. And he said, wise up. That is how could that not affect you deeply?
Yeah.
So it has affected, relationships, definitely has. It has affected my outlook on life. It has, now, a lot of it for the good. The other thing is, I'm the classic empath. I'm the classic empathetic personality type. So he pointed all this out to me. You know what I mean? And things like validation by a woman. Why did I always have to have a girlfriend? Why was I craving this female validation? I didn't have a sister. Didn't have a mum. Never really had a mum. Didn't know her, unfortunately. So all these wee bits and pieces. And then throughout 18 months and 2 years, completely cracked me open to be what I would like to think is this empathetic, self-aware person that I am now. And I do recognize the signs, and I can now deal with certain things. And let me just lead you on to actually what then happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I've told you I've been a carer twice.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So, and this is where all this led up to. The 5th of July, 2017, my dad sat me down and said, son, I've got something to tell you. I went, what's that, Dad? He said, I've got stage 4 cancer in 2 places.
Dear.
And I left my job the next day. I handed in my notice the next day. And I said, right, Dad, payback time. And for 4.5 years, I had the best time with him. Really, really did. Now, that was, the last 18 months was absolute hell. That was a struggle because it was during COVID. And was it 4.5 years? Yeah, it was during COVID. So Dad, for the first 2 years of that journey for him, going through chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and so seeing this man that you idolized and this man you adored and this really strong, stoic man become really weak himself. And my dad was like a well-built 17-stone man, really strong, this stoic person that didn't show the weakness or no emotions or not, and then him really struggling physically. So I left my job. I was back in here with my dad permanently at home, and I looked after him for the 4.5 years. So I was his full-time carer.
Was that quite triggering for you, James, in terms of, were you kind of reliving the kind of emotions that you might have felt that you weren't even aware that you were perhaps dealing with your mum? Did it just feel like, was that hard? Was it harder being a carer for your dad at that point?
The initial couple of years, no, because of drawing on past experience, and then also that 18 months to 2 years of dark night of the soul, where I became much more self-aware and much more strong within myself. That awakening for me happened for a reason, without a doubt, to give me even more additional strength to deal with Dad. Now, the hard thing was COVID. So my dad became very paranoid, as you would. You're a 75-year-old man who has just gone through chemotherapy, and the nonsense that was being peddled maybe on the media, he became incredibly frightened and incredibly scared. So from this being one of the most social houses you've ever seen, complete lockdown for 2 years. Complete lockdown in this house. Wouldn't let his sisters come in to help me. There was no care package, so there was no caring profession at all. So the health service, there was nothing. Visitors had to go out in the yard, and I would have had to, so my dad ended up in a wheelchair, believe it or not, because one of the places was his spine. So maybe wheeled him out into the yard for 5 minutes, and somebody went to the other side of the yard for conversation. So I remember and then the last 6 months, he became completely bedridden. So again, this is back then seeing mum again, but it was my dad. Was it more difficult? Absolutely more difficult, because it wasn't me and Dad looking after this wee woman, this wee girl. It was me on my own completely, looking after a 17-stone big muscular man, and having to turn him 4 times a day, and having to deal with diarrhea 4 times a day, and having to deal with whatever was going on. And thank God I was able to do it. Thank God I was able to do it. But the last 6 months was hell. The last 6 months, I will be open, it was the most difficult period of my life, because I remember I rung a cousin of mine. So I've got a cousin, first cousin, and she is a bit like my sister, to be fair. And she's always been there for me ever since we were in our early teens. And I rung her up and I went, look, I said, I'm in a jail cell here. I can't leave the house, apart from going every 3rd day to go and get food. I can't leave the house. And what's the other alternative? Dad dies. So that was a scenario that I was in for the last 6 months. And that was tough. That was really tough. But again, look, it was an honor. So I've had this unbelievable honor of caring after both parents. I had the best parents in the world. My dad, oh God. So he was never down because his whole attitude was, why not me? Why not me getting this? He says, I'm an old man. So he was going and getting his chemotherapy and he was seeing wee teenage girls. And I remember him saying to me, he says, son, look at that wee darling over there. He says, why not me? I remember him saying that. Again, that's stoicism. But I'm going to contradict myself now, Krutika, in terms of faith, right? I then seen the power of his faith. He had no qualms of dying, no problem in the slightest. He was going to meet his wife and children.
Yeah.
In his mind, no problem at all. As long as Dad had a bit of food and I could bring the laptop into the bedroom and I could watch Mass once a day, aye, he was happy enough. Now, towards the last 6 months, I did have strong words with him. It was the only time we ever row. Or sorry, let me rephrase that. He didn't have a chance to row back. It was the only time I ever shouted at him. And that's, I'm going, Dad, you're too extreme in this whole COVID thing of not letting people into the house. I said, you know, we're talking about, and he did say he was in his last throes. And I went, well, you have to let people into this house. You have to let your family in. He did say to me, son, you were right. But I shouted, I made him cry.
Yeah. Was this a way for you trying to get family members to see your father because they wanted to? Was it to help you guys? Is that why you were keen? Because I know earlier you mentioned your household was one of those households where people wouldn't knock, they'd just walk in. So
It was socially.
yeah, it was a social, yeah.
My dad thrived on talking to people and thrived in stories. Very much an Irish thing is storytelling. He was brilliant at telling stories. One of the best things I ever done was I recorded a video. I interviewed my dad in 2018 and it's on YouTube, believe it or not, and he's absolutely fantastic at it. Absolutely brilliant. But no, it was socially for him because people coming in couldn't have done what I had to do, to be honest. And then the care package arrived about a week and a half before he died, and we didn't know he was going to die. We didn't know. He literally died within 2 days from, yes, being bedridden and all that, but he then just became very ill overnight and died.
James, could I just ask you what might be a personal question, so please don't feel like you have to answer. You know, the passing of both your parents, I can only imagine, would have been very, very tragic, traumatic. How have you sort of handled the death of your dad, obviously more recently, but also your mum when you were a lot younger? How did you deal with that?
With mum, how did I deal with mum dying? I can't actually answer you that. I can tell you more how I handled with dad.
Yeah.
I suppose it's easier to recall that, number one, because it's fresher, and number two, it was just me then.
Mm-hmm.
I started traveling again, so I'm a massive traveler, and then I had the goal of visiting all 8 wonders of the world, which I've done.
Amazing.
I then was quite lucky in that, funny, again, one of the things of the dark night of the soul, 16, 17-ish, I started my coaching business and using LinkedIn as the platform. And that came from all that. And then what came from that coaching business then was a part-time university role, which was allowed to happen throughout COVID. Ulster University were incredibly flexible and incredibly good to me. That gave me some money to survive because remember, I left my job and went on to 64 quid a week CARES allowance. 64 quid a week, like. Thank God at home though. So again, the business and that kept me busy. And then thankfully went into a full-time role in uni. So normality came back there. And then the other thing, which is I then inherited the 130-year-old country cottage which is my great grandfather's, and I've spent the last 3.5, 4 years renovating it. So that was not just that was a distraction, absolutely, but also a bit of a passion project because the number of times people have come in here and went, who designed this for you? And I've done it myself. They go, you're joking. So it's always been a little bit of a passion project. There were those things, those distractions, and your friends come into the fore. And remember, I'm an only child, but my dad was one of 15, so I've got a massive extended family. And we're all very close. And also the village is very good. So again, the people are still coming in.
James, I have such admiration for the way that you have kind of articulated your journey and, you know, what's obviously been quite a challenging one, yet you are taking so much positivity from it and the wonderful parents that you sort of have described. I mean, if I could ask you, what have you learnt about yourself through this entire process? What would you say?
What a question. What a question. What have I learned about myself? I've learned that I'm much more resilient than I give myself credit for. One thing I will say, And this is always a work in progress. So I would have, believe it or not, quite low self-esteem. I would never really think particularly highly of myself. Now, again, that's also not just from circumstances, because you don't have your mum putting your arm around you going, aren't you a great wee guy? My dad done that a million times. It's not, your dad doing that a million times is not once, not like once from your mum. Like, so there was that, and that nurturing and that confidence building. Confidence has always been a work in progress with me. Then I can't take praise very much. So I've learned about that. And I've learned to try and take some praise whenever people go, right, you've done a hell of a good job or whatever. Now, I'm the classic people pleaser. I've had to be all my life. Part of being an empath is the people pleaser. I've had to learn to start to say no in my life, which is a hard thing. One of the hardest things in the world is to say 2 letters. I've had to try and do that. I suppose the other thing that I've learned, I wonder if I can mention this. Anyway, I done something crazy about 2 years ago. Really crazy, really crazy, right? I'm going to just put it out there like an alternative therapy. I'm going to put that out there. And I've done that. I had 4 intentions whenever I was doing this alternative therapy. And the second intention was to come to terms with me. And whenever I came through the process, I had scribbled down on a piece of paper, James, you're not a bad fella after all, are you? That's a massive realization for me. You're not a bad fella, James, are you? You're a good lad. Never would have thought of that. Because it's all about everybody else, from my perspective. You're here to help everybody else. And so there we go. Maybe this is the biggest learning. The biggest learning is you have to look after yourself. And I didn't, because I give everything else to everybody. I give all parts of me to everybody, which is great. But whenever your own cup becomes empty, one thing I will say, it took 18 months to recover from dad physically for me. And learning also mind-body integration and coming to terms with the fact that I do have severe trauma. Didn't realize that. Macho Man James would never realize that. But realizing the trauma, there's a good old, maybe people, listeners have heard the guy called Gabor Mate. And Gabor Mate is talking the impact of trauma on the body, and the body holds the score, or body keeps the score. If you'd said that to me 10 years ago, I would have that's pseudo-scientific mumbo-jumbo. It's bloody true. All these realizations and all these learnings, I can't answer that in one go. I could talk to you for 2 hours on the learnings.
I know, James, and I know it is a somewhat difficult question, but I simply ask that because you have just had such a incredible journey so far, if I could say, and I don't mean incredible in terms of obviously the sort of tragic circumstances that you were in, but more incredible in the way that you look at it and have dealt with it. And I know you mentioned you don't like praise, and that is me sort of giving you praise for the way that you've handled it and come out of it. So
I'll just give you one last example of that. I went to Queen's University in Belfast to do a degree in accounting, right? And I had to get a first-class degree. This is the other problem. I would be a severe perfectionist. But I had to get a first-class degree, and that was for Mum. She was still living at that stage. So I was very lucky. I was able to take the graduation gowns home and have photographs at home with her. That was for her. I've lived enough for 2 lives already, and I'm only 46. And every achievement I do is for my parents. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut across you there.
No. Thank you for sort of flagging that. It's wonderful how you've been also able to kind of understand your personality traits and where it sort of comes from, whether you talk about being that empath because you've grown up having to care for your mom, your dad eventually, the perfectionism, the people pleasing, all of that. You are very self-aware, and it takes a lot for one to get to that stage. Just to sort of wrap up on our conversation, James, I'd love for you to share maybe a bit of advice for someone who's listening that's potentially going through maybe some of the things that you've spoken about.
Number 1 is please find someone to talk to. That is not just anybody. This could take a bit of digging. You have to find someone that can relate in some way to you. Not the person or the counsellor that's just there for a tick box exercise. Because whenever I was talking to the conventional counsellor, it was literally, and I don't want to put this in a bad way, but it was literally just like they're ticking off and I'm not going to commit suicide. That's how I felt. That's how I felt. It was a tick box exercise. So please, if anybody's going through this, reach out to me or whatever. Talk to somebody who can relate in some way. That could take a bit of digging through. But if someone can go, I know what you're going through and this is what I'm thinking, it gives you a sense of a little more clarity, because whenever you don't know what's going on, you don't know what you don't know. But if somebody has experienced it, they know, That's an important thing. And then the second thing is get some sort of release mechanism. And for me as well, that was the gym. So after my Gaelic football career finished, and that was a massive impact on me. Gaelic football was my life. And whenever my calves started to pack up, that was another issue in my life and things like that. But try and get some sort of other release, whether that'll be a hobby or physical training, or if you can go for an overnight somewhere and travel, or get a cheap flight somewhere, whatever that may be. Also make sure you're doing something for you. Because whenever, as the good old saying, you can't give from an empty cup. You can't.
Yeah.
And I probably was very, very empty up until about, certainly up into 2015 and then 2022. You get very empty at those 2 periods of time. And then you have to fill yourself again.
Yeah, and they say when you're flying on an aircraft with the initial guidance videos, always put your mask on first before you help others. So that is obviously something we always need to be thinking about in all aspects of our life. Thank you so much for sharing so honestly, James, your journey. I'm sure there'll be people listening that will benefit from just some of the advice that you've imparted, but also just feeling in awe of, I guess, how you've handled everything that you've encountered. Now, you mentioned that you've already visited the 8 wonders of the world, but I always ask my guests a final question, which is, what journey are you on next?
Oh, so I'm in a bit of a crossroads in terms of, if you know about my bit on LinkedIn, being the exam coach, and that's how I made my name on LinkedIn. That led me to my university role, which, going back to the good old empath and people pleasing, is I love helping other people. So if I can say something in a classroom, it's fantastic. So that's led me, believe it or not, my journey has led me to that aspect. But in terms of my, what I'm going to say, side hustle and the exam coaching on LinkedIn, that's going somewhere else. And I don't quite know where that's taking me, whether it'll be more the career development or personal development of men. I don't know. There's something going on with that professional side. The personal side is, well, I've done all 8 wonders and I now want to do all 53 or 54, whatever it is, countries in Europe. We're quite lucky. I've got Ryanair 90 minutes down the way in Dublin, and that takes you everywhere. So, I think I've done about 26 or 27. In terms of that, there is all other elements. I want to speak Irish. I can hardly speak English, so that's a struggle. There's other stupid things. I want to learn how to play chess. There's small bits and pieces that are uniquely just for me, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I believe it or not, the foundation, albeit how tumultuous it was to build, the foundation is very strong. I'm very lucky and blessed. I own this beautiful home and I've got a wonderful job that I enjoy. I've got a side hustle that I can do and do something else. It's all these other bits for me. So that's where the journey is now enjoying the journey. Maybe that's the way to put it.
And what a beautiful way to put it, enjoying the journey, and so many exciting things that you have lined up, whether it's sort of personally or professionally. Thank you once again, James, for joining me on this conversation.
We enjoyed that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Journeys with Krutika. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and share. I'd love for you to hit the follow button wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you have a journey that you want to share, email me at journeyswithkrutika@gmail.com or reach out via my socials. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. Just search Journeys with Krutika, because your journey is extraordinary.